Thank you. I want to invite all the panelists to come back. So it's great to kind of wrap things up with the people who started in the opening day yesterday. And we had an opportunity to raise many conversations over the last 2 days. Oh, we're missing. Oh, hi.
Late comer.
It's okay. So maybe we'll do a quick reintroduction of names and roles so we remember exactly who's who. We have also the slide in the back. And we're going to talk a little bit about takeaways because it's really important for us to not just make it about talking about what we're doing and talking and what needs to be done, but what actions are we going to take away from this conference and what collaborations can we foster as an outcome of this conference. So maybe we can do a quick round. Do you all have microphones? Yes. Okay.
I can start. Sorry, are we doing introductions?
Yeah, quick introduction.
Yeah, Lucia Harris. I am Director of Member Protection at Match Group.
I'm Lisa Plaggemier. I'm the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance.
Literally. Hi, everyone. Kate Griffin with the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program.
Ken Westbrook, Stop Scams Alliance. I'm the Left to Boom guy.
And if you forgot, Ayelet Biger-Levin. I'm the CEO and founder of Rangers AI and host of the Scam Rangers podcast. Okay, now my phone locked. Okay, so I wanted to start with takeaways from the conference. What have you learned at the conference, and what do you think you can take away as a next step as a collaboration from the conference? So maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so one of the things that really stood out to me was the nexus between trust and safety, which I think about all the time, and advertising, which I rarely think about, even though my husband works in advertising. It's the same mechanisms that are being used to target consumers. Those are the same mechanisms that scammers are using to target potential victims. And so not only can we perhaps lean on that infrastructure, but we can lean on some of the learnings from that industry. There was an interesting example shared, which was that there are scammers who are using advertising infrastructure in order to target senior centers because they're able to basically like geofence them. And so if we can basically find ways to learn from one another within different industries that maybe wouldn't necessarily be coming together on the same problems, we're able to more effectively disrupt scams.
I'll build on that a little bit. I think we have silos too between trust and safety and security and fraud and scams that I don't think really serve us really well. The bad guys don't have these silos. The victims don't care about our silos. So I would just, for our part, we're going to try to have more. I heard a lot of speakers here today and yesterday that we would love to have at some of our security events. I mean, that's one way we can start tearing down the barriers. One of the other barriers, I think, is in the language that we use. And in one of the sessions, I was on attended the information sharing track yesterday, and I hear some of the same conversation that I heard in cybersecurity 20 years ago, or even in the last 10 years. It's hard to believe that we didn't have all the ISACs that we have today, even 10 years ago in cybersecurity. So talking about data sharing and or analysis sharing or signal sharing or any of the different ways we want to talk about it, to me, it sounds an awful lot like an ISAC, and I know I'm not a data person by any stretch of the imagination, but that kind of terminology, that your board knows what that is. Your CEO knows what that is. Your CISO knows what an ISAC is. Is this another cross-sector ISAC, or do we need to start with a clean sheet of paper? Can we start with the data sharing contracts we've used in our ISAC, or do we need to start, God forbid, with a clean sheet of paper with the attorneys? And I love some of my best friends are attorneys, but I would rather start with an existing agreement and mark that up than start with a clean sheet of paper. So I think just the language that we're using, trying to find more ways to work together. A lot of you know people in your security teams, they're do-gooders. They care more about protecting people than protecting your organization. I mean, they know that any organization is really about human beings. So I think thinking in terms of, oh, well, they're protecting, our org and we're protecting our customers, or I think it's a differentiation that doesn't really need to be made. So that's what I'm going to try and work on after these 2 days, is getting rid of some of the silos and some of the things that separate us, because we really have a lot more in common than we realize.
So, Kate, what are some of your takeaways?
Sure. I've really been struck, and building off of your comment about silos, that this is sort of its own emerging ecosystem of scam fighters, right? And just really looking at the energy in the room, from like the number of phones taking pictures of slides, to the power of kind of hearing the story of the launch of the Global Signal Exchange, sort of originating from, dialogues at a past GASA event. It really hit home for me, the importance and the value of holding space for this emerging ecosystem to find those collaborative moments to solve problems big and small. And so that is very much the intent and mandate and some of the things that we'll be doing with the National Task Force on Fraud and Scam Prevention here in the US. But it really, for me, was very energizing to be in this space and think about the ways to continue providing that kind of space for some very needed dialogue here in this country.
So let's check with the audience of that. So raise your hand if you have made at least one connection with a person you think can advance your goal moving forward in fighting scams. So you're correct. Awesome. That's great. What are your takeaways, Ken?
Yeah, well, you just stole some of my thunder for sure, because I all day long, and yesterday too, I saw sidebar conversations. I saw people chatting, making new relationships, and in some of the sessions I was in, I frequently heard, oh, we need this or we need that, and then somebody in the room would say, well, I got that, let's talk. So that's the kind of power that this kind of a forum brings. But one other point that I would say in terms of what I learned, the most astonishing words I heard during the whole conference was when a representative of the White House National Cyber Director stood right there and said, we have your back. That was just amazing to me, because I just have never heard those words before from the U.S. government. And I know that they're serious too. You may not know that he brought with him 3 other people. So we had 4 people yesterday from the White House National Cyber Director here to learn about what's going on. They are committed to start making a difference, and that's absolutely huge.
So we'll stay with you, Ken, and with that, on the first day, you presented a really big vision. One was to push legislation that promotes information sharing between the tech sector and banks. The second one was to establish a centralized data hub for sharing, and the third one was creating a national anti-scam center. So those are really big goals. And I wanted to ask you, what steps do you see as critical to making this a reality? And how can we collectively work towards advancing these goals? What kind of help do you need?
Yeah, so in other words, what does it take to move a mountain? So just by background, by my count, there's now 9 nations in the world that have national anti-scam centers. Every year, 2 or 3 additional countries are joining the club. And it's because they make so much sense. It's like crazy ROI when you think about it. For the expenditure of a few $100 million, you can save tens of billions of dollars of losses. But in the U.S., I've thought about it and I've talked to my colleagues, and I think ROI is a part of the equation, but it's not enough. What we're going to have to add to that is emotion. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So let's look back in the U.S. We establish fusion centers from time to time. We established the National Counterterrorism Center, but only after the horror of 9/11. We established the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, but only after there were some very prominent news stories about kids, horrific stories about kids being kidnapped and not recovered in time because we were not sufficiently connected across jurisdictional lines. So that's what led President Reagan in 1984 to say, damn it, we're going to create this thing. So where are we on the thermometer, outrage thermometer now in the U.S.? I'd say we're not quite at a damn it point. We're getting there. I think I see more and more energy, more press, more attendance from the White House at meetings like this. Congress is paying attention. There's more and more constituent complaints about this, but we're not yet at the tipping point. You know, everybody in this room has their hair on fire about scams. I mean, I see flames over there, and I see some flames over there too, and my hair's definitely on fire. But Congress is 4 miles away from here, and their hair is not yet on fire, because their hair is on fire about lots of things, and this is just one thing on their agenda. It's not yet a front burner issue for them. So how do you get it there? What's going to, Ayelet asked me, be sure to talk about what it's going to take to get us there. So here you go. I think we have to come to believe, the U.S. has to believe that the threat of transnational scams is an existential threat to our society and our financial system and our commerce. And then once we begin to realize that our dollars are funding more and more human slavery, more human trafficking, more organized crime, and it presents a threat to our society, then we can start to sell the case through op-eds, podcasts, memorable YouTube videos. Hollywood, never underestimate the power of Hollywood. Love to get them involved. And then there's good old-fashioned lobbying. The largest companies in the United States have a lot of lobbying power. They have the ability, if they want to press for a centralized data fusion capability. And that would change the game. And some of you are in the room today, so let's make it happen.
Thank you. And I think just taking what you said and building upon that, we have analysts here, and we have reports that were published, and we have people who are in the media and doing podcasts. And I think everyone continue and double down, and if you can continue to portray, thought leadership on LinkedIn and other sources, but also, let's keep talking, let's keep setting, because I think we realize that this is, transnational crime organizations stealing our people's hard-earned money, and it will and has impact on the economy. We just don't understand it yet on the national level. So once we keep pounding that message and explaining, hopefully we will get to that damn it moment that you mentioned. So transitioning from that, I wanted to ask Lucia, on the first day you told us about what you're doing as a blueprint with Coinbase and Meta. And I wanted to ask you, what opportunities exist to build that connective tissue between industry players with the experience that you've gained so far? And what are some blockers to those opportunities? Because I know I talked about the elephant in the room. So what are some blockers, and what are some ways to overcome those? Or even if you don't have answers, highlighting the blockers is okay too.
Yeah, everyone get your bingo cards out. I'm going to say it again, sharing data. I think sharing data presents an enormous opportunity. Sharing bad actor data is important. I would say that one of the things, we hear a lot about how there's a lot of legal frameworks that have to be navigated, and that's true, but I don't think that that's the blocker or the core friction. I think, at least within our space, one of the core frictions that we don't talk about enough is that we have to reverse engineer data sharing for appeals. And so it's not as simple as getting a piece of data from Meta and hearing like, okay, this, Lacey at gmail.com is a bad actor, make sure that she's removed. Or this IP is from bad actor, like a scam center, so make sure anyone who signs up with it is removed. Because users have the opportunity to appeal. And when they appeal, we need to look at the original decision that was made to take them off of our platform. And we can't do that if the reason we have banned them in the first place is just because another platform said they were bad. And so the thing that's most critical to understand is that when we get that information, we still have to independently investigate on our platforms. And I think it's important to emphasize that because there is a lot of operational overhead that goes into data sharing. So that's bad actor data sharing. I also think there's an enormous opportunity with good actor data sharing. We have not really had the opportunity to prove that out because there is no legal precedent for it. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but if we were able to tell Coinbase that this person, John at gmail.com has matched with a known pig, nope, not gonna say pig butcherer, a known relationship investment scammer, love that term. If we know that John has matched with them and is now going over and taking out $10K in Tether for the first time on Coinbase, it would be helpful for Coinbase to know that John has interacted with someone who is probably a scammer. That's really valuable signal. And so that could change that consumer's experience, and it could reduce losses further down the funnel. I think the other thing we talked about today as well was that one thing that we're facing is educating users with, in-app interstitials and just-in-time moments, and everyone expressed that, they haven't been able to hit that success point yet. But what if it wasn't just one platform? What if when you signed on to Instagram, you were told that you had, the person that you had recently friended was part of a scam group, and also on WhatsApp, they said, this phone number is associated with the scam, and Coinbase also told you, hey, this person is part of a scam ring that you're sending money to, and Tinder did the same thing, and it was repeated across all the platforms you're using and all the platforms that are part of that scam. That might be a little bit more compelling, and the only way to do that would be through sharing user data that is good user data. So I don't know what the solution there is other than a regulatory one, but I'm sure there's some people in this room who could maybe think through that, and I would love to chat more. Absolutely. And I will end on that.
So next question for Kate. So I think you have a really great opportunity to lead change, and a really challenging one too, because while we all aim to make positive impact, business goals can be sometimes conflicting with the mission. So how can you ensure progress and cross-industry collaboration to drive meaningful progress with that conflicting motivation that happens? And how can you encourage other organizations to join you in the mission?
Thank you. I appreciate the question, because I think you're naming some of the really difficult things to tackle. And part of it has to do with how the Aspen Institute has worked on affecting large societal change in its history. And that focus is really on working with values-based leaders to affect the change they need to see. All of you are in this room. You are entrepreneurs working inside your companies to affect that kind of change. You are out there on the front lines trying to talk as loudly as you can. And so if any work that we can do in the task force helps to supercharge your efforts, shine a spotlight, get resources towards you, then that's an important part or effort of the work of the task force that helps with this issue. And a lot of times we are working with leaders who are working on change from within those systems. I'd say secondly, I think it's really important to recognize that there are, I think, sort of 3 levels of conversation happening. First is what we've all named, which is cross-sector, right? These different sectors need to be having a conversation with each other, and that is a lot of what we will be doing in the task force. I've been saying that really the first thing that we need to do is to get everybody to agree on what the problem is we're trying to solve, right? And have a common understanding of that problem and a common understanding of what each other are already doing against that. So that getting to that step will even be, I think, a win and help propel us forward in those pieces. There's, of course, within sector pieces to do, and I see and have talked with so many different trade groups who are working with their member organizations, thinking about, Lucia sitting here and the work that she's doing within social media tech companies. That's powerful, important work that it needs to contribute to this. And then finally, there is the work in conversation with our government here in the US, and what our asks are of them as we move forward, whether those are individual things that need to happen, clarity on 314B, for example, for information sharing, whether it is large-scale interagency government coordination, or whether there's legislative change that we need to ask for, right? And what's true, and it is a responsibility that we don't take lightly, is that we have a task force of members whose voice is extraordinarily powerful in combination. And we'll be working towards what are the points of convergence, and I use that word intentionally, it is not a consensus-based process we're undertaking, the task force members. If you're not aware of that already, come talk to me. But we've been clear about it from the beginning. But where there is convergence, and to really, that voice with our government has enormous power. And we've seen it before in other kinds of social change that we've been able to work towards at Aspen. Anyway, I think all of those things in combination are important to address the real kind of issues that you've laid out there.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about it, the elephant in the room, it's really important to do what we can to drive change and baby steps, but we need to act fast, which I'll get to in just a second. But Lisa, I wanted to ask you, one of the challenges that you mentioned in all of the education efforts you shared with us yesterday was, what do we do with individuals who are indifferent, who don't listen, who will say, it will never happen to me, I'm good. And so how can you collaborate with companies and organizations that are in this panel to address these individuals and persuade those individuals?
Those are my favorite people. Like, I'm a former CMO, so give me somebody who's completely indifferent, doesn't care, isn't paying attention. Like, that's the big challenge. That's what we really like to sink our teeth into. When I was working in marketing, I was working at a company that was being spun off by its parent, a corporate parent, and the chief security officer came to me and said, well, I want you to join the security team. I said, what am I going to do on the security team? Like, I'm the marketing bozo. Like, I know, aside from doing thought leadership on security topics, I have no clue about any of this stuff. And he said, well, I need help with board presentations and like all these comms things, incident comms, stuff like that. And oh yeah, we need training and awareness. Well, what's training and awareness? Oh, you know that stuff that corporate makes us do once a year. I said, I don't want to do that. People hate that stuff. Nobody thinks they're going to be the one who's going to click on the fish. Nobody thinks they're going to be the one who's going to fall for the scam. And he said, okay, well then let's just do something completely different. He said, but I want you to get up every day when you do this job with the assumption that nobody cares. And I think one of the things about events like this is that we're surrounded by a bunch of people who care. And it gives us energy. And so it feels really good for these 2 days. But we have to go back out into the world and remember that people go about their lives every day, they do their jobs, they take care of their families, they do whatever it is they do, and they don't care. This is not top of mind for them. This just isn't something that they think about until maybe they're affected or one of their loved ones is affected. And I'm afraid that's the tipping point that we're getting close to, Ken, is that so many of us know somebody who's been affected. And that's where the outrage is gonna come from. The other thing is leaning into storytelling when we talk about this and not using, like I talked about yesterday, scary terminology. The reason we were all almost crying this morning is because we heard the stories. We heard the victim stories. So don't forget to humanize this problem. That can be a really good way of getting people's attention. Speaking of getting people's attention, I think the other thing that happens, I've seen this happen in cybersecurity with really great content on, just basic good cyber habits, where people will produce some great stuff and then not put any money into the promotion or advertising of it. The rule of thumb in the advertising world is you spend 4 or 5 times more than you spent on the actual production cost of whatever it was you made. As far to get eyeballs on it. So to get people's attention, we can't just produce good content. We can't just say smart things. We can't just be really helpful people and have good, helpful advice. We have to actually put money behind the promotion of it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so our time is almost up, but I'm going to do a fire round here. We all know, and we've heard, and especially if you were in the cyber and investigations, scam compounds are growing and exploding in Southeast Asia. And just popping up. And I sat there and I don't know, I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's very scary, the rate that this space is growing, which means that many, many more people are being targeted for online scams. So the question to the panelists in one sentence is how is the world going to look different in 6 months as a result of the work that you're doing? So Lucia, maybe we'll start with you.
More proactive referrals between tech and law enforcement. Right now, the Tech Against Scams Coalition is doing a summit, an ill-timed summit, since we're here as well in Bangkok to build inroads with a lot of the law enforcement on the ground there. And so really starting to build those relationships and make sure that we are not just focusing on our own geographies, but that we are going to as close to the problem as we can to build really effective partnerships. And I'm hopeful that with more proactive referrals, we can ideally start to move the needle on this problem.
We'll have another season of Cubicle with a couple of episodes about scams and a couple million more people who will have seen those by this time next year. And then we're fundraising now to try and do, like, what does Cubicle look like for the aging population? Like, what sort of content would you put in front of my mom, because it's probably not Cubicle, that would get millions and millions of views and maybe keep some of the aging population from being defrauded?
Right.
So my hope in the next 6 months, and again, these are large things to move on. So one, we'll be through a set of working group conversations, and some of it, the magic is what's going to happen in those conversations and what happens after them. Similar to the connections being fostered here, how do those connection fosterings continue to spark individual kind of change among people who connect? I hope, and we'll be working on making progress towards identifying and working with government champions. And finally, our charge to our group working on metrics is to set a goal, is to set a challenge for how can we measure progress in this country, and set a goal for what the task force can achieve.
And Ken, last but not least.
3 things. One is in 6 months, we'll have another Gallup poll in the field. If anyone in this room would like to contribute to that, we'll really get it over the top. We're almost there. Number 2, you may have noticed we had an election recently, and the U.S. politics will be somewhat different in 6 months than it is now. My prediction is that the effort that the White House has started in the Biden administration will survive, and the White House under the Trump administration will have energy on this too. I'm optimistic about that. Number 3, speaking of elephants in the room, we were having breakfast this morning, and at the end of it, 3 of us were kind of in a corner, and all of us said that we had had close family members had remote access software on their computers and were scammed that way. Yesterday, you all heard Kit Bogo talk, a great presentation about remote access software and the harm that causes. The U.S. government says that the tech support scam is the #1 scam in the United States, affecting older people, measured by number of victims. So what I'm going to be doing is creating a national effort to stop the tech support scams. If we get the operating system people, the browser people, AV people, and the advertising industry together, we can squash this thing.
Right. Thank you so much.